East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause were released in 1955, the same year that another groundbreaking movie altered the way teenagers viewed the world.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock.
Blackboard Jungle was the first movie to include a rock and roll soundtrack, and Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock became a hit. Rock historian Martin Lewis.
Technological advances, particularly in television and radio, meant that new trends spread across the country faster than in previous generations, and for the first time teenagers were creating their own style. The movie Blackboard Jungle and the song Rock Around the Clock, which both became hits, with Bill Haley becoming the first rock and roll superstar. Meanwhile, as word was starting to spread from Memphis about a young guy called Elvis Presley, whose shocking music was exciting a whole new generation. Then, Rebel Without a Cause was released in October of that year, and the kids suddenly had a visual connection to the rebellious music they were hearing on the radio. And the world would never be the same again.
Martin Landau.
Prior to World War II, grown-ups determined style, music, and most culture in this country. After World War II, it changed. There was a lot of unrest and dissatisfaction with the status quo. Times were changing, communication. Things started happening quicker, and there were more awarenesses. Tastes started changing, and the young people began to sow their oats and express themselves. That's when rhythm and blues started, and rock and roll started, and black music suddenly became white music, and barriers started changing. And you had a lot of dissatisfaction with a lot of teenagers who felt cramped in this expanding world. And Jimmy and Elvis were rebels, with a cause, without a cause, with reason, without reason.
James Dean's role of Jim Stark in Rebel Without a Cause hit a chord with teenagers all over the world. On this side of the Atlantic, for the first time, kids saw images of U.S. teenagers who were part of the generation that were embracing the exciting new sounds of rock and roll. Bill Wyman explains.
Being a bit of a rebel, like everybody wanted to be, I could relate to him, and I suppose many teenagers at the time could relate to him, because they weren't always happy with their parents, and they wanted a fast car, and they wanted to be cool and all that, you know, and you just dared to do things. And I immediately went out and bought a guitar. You were so inspired because everything was changing in America. Brando, you know, Dean, Elvis, the whole thing was just like it was in England in the 60s. We were 6 or 8 years later, but it was the same thing. Fashion, design, art, music, theatre, films, changed in England.
Adam Faith.
He represented for the first time on the screen someone of our age group that was going his own way. He didn't necessarily succeed at it, but who cared? He was going his own way. And up to then, really, teenagers weren't encouraged to learn by their own mistakes. They were taught to learn by their betters, by their elders' mistakes, by their experience. And here was James Dean experiencing life totally for himself.
George Perry.
Until James Dean came along, teenagers were a very repressed species. The idea of the T-shirts and the jeans and all that stuff. Jimmy Dean was going around, you know, in his cowboy boots and his T-shirts and the zipper jackets and so on. Long before that was the norm. And in fact, if you were to plonk him down in the street today, he'd look perfectly in place. In the 50s, he looked unusual.
David Bailey was a young photographer when he first saw Rebel Without a Cause.
He was the first young American hero in a way, because he was a teenager, and they didn't have teenagers, it seemed to me, in America. He wasn't cheesy like Frank Sinatra. He wasn't really cool. He was just like a nouveau riche gangster, wasn't he? Whereas James Dean was sort of cool. Sometimes when I photograph a young actor, I say, give us a bit of the James Dean moody, and they seem to know what it is. There's a kind of James Dean code. In fact, the first big money I ever got, I went out and bought a black leather jacket.
You should have seen us run when we heard the last school bell ring.
David Putnam was also inspired by James Dean's jacket.
I lived in a small suburb, North London, and one day I was walking past a men's shop, Meeker's, and in the window was this red anorak.
Go, man, go, we got 3 musketeers.
And I went in and found one that fitted me, and my friend Derek bought one as well, and we were able to walk around for a couple of years, go and come up to Soho to the coffee bars, wearing this extraordinary red jacket, which was a replica of James Dean's, until it literally fell off our backs. But the fact that this odd men's store in Southgate, North London, actually had this jacket in it is some testament to the influence that James Dean must have had even then.
No more learning. I'm just staring at you till your chest starts to burn. June, July, and August.
Michael J. Sheridan.
He affected people worldwide. Whatever the genius was within him, he did something. He tripped something in all of us that made us stand up and look and see what the hell was going on with him. Prior to James Dean, I don't think the teenagers had an identity.
Go, man, go, we got 3 musketeers.
Elvis Presley was one of the American teenagers who became obsessed with James Dean and decided that he too wanted to become an actor. When Elvis met Rebel Without a Cause director Nicholas Ray, he knelt down on his knees and began to recite pages of Dean's dialogue and told the director he had watched the movie dozens of times to learn the lines. Presley's career took off virtually at the same time as James Dean's. Yet despite all the influence Dean had on rock and roll stars, he died before Elvis had released his first hit. But his on-screen image matched perfectly the power of rock and roll. Bill Wyman.
Elvis's rebellion and ours did it via music, whereas Brando and James Dean were doing it on the big screen. When I first saw him in those films, he really did blow my mind. Like Elvis did when I first heard the first Elvis record. The hairs go back on the back of your neck and you know that it's something exceptionally special and original.
Bob Dylan was another young musician who idolized James Dean. Leroy Hoykala was a school friend of Bob's and played in his first band, the Golden Chords.
John Buckland, Bob Dylan, Bob Zimmerman at the time, and myself, our idol was James Dean, no doubt about it. We figured that not only a great actor, we figured that it was a part of his personality that came out. And I still remember the movies we saw and everything. We saw them, 5 times each, and I think Bob saw more than that. It was something brand new at the time because the old movies were not like Rebel Without a Cause, and that was one of our favorites. And Bob just loved that movie because he was a bit of a rebel himself. He was our idol. We had motorcycles at the time, and the 3 of us were basically a little nonconformists, that we didn't go with the flow of everything. And to see someone like that acting, we just thought it was absolutely great.